I'm definitely putting my hat and glasses on this time. Last time I tried to start it, had a computer malfunction, but really I would have sweat to death out here. So
yeah, well, you got to stay protected against the sun. Especially we were discussing kind of like how prone to our micro tanning solution. You know,
micro tanning. Yeah, it's a new thing. You know, we're gonna work on it. I know. Speaking of appearance, you wore the Cubs hat. You wore the wool Cubs hat.
Yes, the mythical Cubs hat. You know, wool. It's kind of that all weather thing. It is luxury too. But I'm happy with it just because again, it's keeping my hair in place.
Oh, that's the move.
Yeah, and providing shade, and I like to think it's kind of providing some dramatic shadows.
Definitely.
And kind of elongating my face, accentuating my jawline.
All the key elements of facial features and characteristics that we look for on the Never End of Becoming. Thank you so much for thinking about that, Joe.
Of course. Yeah.
So it sounds better this time.
It does.
Sounds much better.
I was going to say it's like a hi-fi. I got lost in the vibes.
In all fairness, so we had to start again. We had it was a 47-second conversation before where we must have got to a minute because the intro did start, and my computer was acting a little funky.
Well, and I feel like I'm getting a reputation as someone who brings a lot of hot takes to the program. I had like 3 good hot takes in that 47 seconds.
Actually, we did start excellent. We did start very strong.
Yes.
We had a narrative. It was somehow ironic, but it was still playful, but it was still appeasing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's like it's gone. I don't even remember what I said. Especially when I'm like, how it's like trying to remember somebody's name, when you're like really nervous or something.
I hate it.
You know what I mean? You're just like, you ask them, and then it's like, I won't be able to ask them for years. And I think, because
for years.
Or you have to like, ask somebody else like, yo, what's their name?
You need to introduce them to a new friend. Right. And then just, try to force them to introduce themselves to one another.
But
somehow.
I've noticed that it's even harder to remember because you are, like, for me, I'm just already ashamed, right?
Yeah.
So now I ask somebody else or do the old, this is my friend so-and-so, hoping that they'll exchange names for you.
Yeah.
Right. And then
my name is James, by the way, if you've forgotten. Yes. I don't know if this is one long way of trying to ask me what my name is again. Joe, thank you for being on the 37th episode of the podcast.
Of course.
A little housekeeping.
Of course. Yeah.
Or was this a long way for you to make sure I introduced you properly on the show? Was that what?
Do you remember my name?
One thing I didn't ask you last time is, and I know you use Art with Anderson. Do you like to go by Art with Anderson? Or like if I post this episode, do you want it to be like Never Ending Becoming and Art with Anderson? Well, or is Joe and James sensible to you?
Joe Anderson is fine just because it's like, here is my true, artistic identity, It's something that I've kind of thought about. Joe Anderson.
Right, yeah.
Or, for my premium brand, Joseph Thomas Anderson.
I was going to ask you if you're going into directing, you can throw it on there. Also recently realized that 2 of the best directors have Anderson as the last name. Wes Anderson and Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yes. But it is tough when having like a middle initial T and having a last name Anderson, because I was like, Joseph T. Anderson or J.T. Anderson might get a little tough if people are Google searching. But then even more, there was a player for the Bears named Joe Anderson. So like when I first got my, first domain name, it was like Joe Anderson Chicago. But even that was like, I would get outranked by a Chicago Bears player. So it's like,
yeah, you can't win that battle.
Yeah, man.
That's funny. So you tried to use Chicago as part of your earlier online presence?
Yeah, it was
because I'm a major Chicago person. I'll rep the city as hard as I can for as long and as loud as I can as people will listen.
Well, the thing is like I tried it out. You know how like on those fashion brands, they'll like have like some really like sparse label, and it'll be like New York, Paris, Hong Kong, and
Milan. Milan.
So maybe I should just throw a few more cities on there.
Oh shit, you should.
You know what I mean?
I have a friend that does that. She lives in Chicago, but like her family spent a lot of time. She's from Italy, from Rome. So she has like Chicago, Rome. She even grew up in like Philadelphia.
Yeah. I just don't know if...
So it adds a weight.
I don't know if like Chicago and Downers Grove would have the same effect.
Chicago, Downers Grove.
Champaign, Illinois.
I'm trying to think of it. Yeah. U of I, Urbana.
Yeah.
You should pick Urbana because I feel like Champaign That's what most people would put. Oh, I went to Champaign. You should show that you're a little different by saying I went to Urbana. So don't people do that? Isn't that like a thing?
Well, it is, but some of the Illini watching might know the kind of the stereotypes of did you live Champaign and Urbana? Now this is the thing
you want the Champagne crowd is what you're saying?
Well, no. See, that's the thing is but ironically, we were like the only outpost of hipsters in Champaign. Like that was kind of we were just too out there. You know what I mean? Like Urbana couldn't take us. I feel like Urbana was just like,
that's the move though, is to go to the bro side of town and then hip it up in the bro side of town. Because if you're broing it up in the hip part of town, people are upset about that.
I was gonna say, man, anywhere where I can get more of the spotlight, it's just you gotta.
But that's the thing about those peacock feathers is contrast does matter a lot, right? Color contrast. So you can't be peacocking in the same way that someone is at 4th and John.
Yeah, peacock feathers stick out against pink polos really well. You know what I mean? But yeah, we have talked a lot about fashion on here. A little follow up. We did talk corduroy last.
We did.
I literally the week afterwards, my sister is a fashionista, but she met up with me and my brother for lunch.
Here it comes.
They had just gone to Madewell, and
by Madewell, do you mean Paris Fashion Week?
Yeah.
No, Madewell is like the upscale Gap, isn't it?
Right. I'd say it's like kind of like
upscale Banana Republic, rather. It's like one step above Banana Republic.
I think it's very like denim centric J. Crew. You know what I mean? Like but it's got a little bit more panache, like in the denim side. Like
what am I thinking? No, I'm not. It's not like it's not fancy, but it's extremely expensive, casual wear.
And it better be made well for the prices you pay. You know what I mean?
And for the namesake.
Right. But she was saying like, oh man, I didn't get it, but like they have corduroy this season. A lot of corduroy coming through. I'm telling you, we're onto something here.
No, I feel cheap now because I mean, really, if they have this in production at this point, that idea is probably from 3 months ago.
That's true.
We had that idea a month ago, so really we're behind the times. We can in this moment project what's next. Actually, post corduroy, like the post corduroy fashion frenzy that we possibly will be starting off on this very podcast.
I mean, I always wait for the day that like latex will make it. But that I think is years off. But
latex has to be a counterculture thing forever. Like it has to stay at the basement level.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people wearing latex are probably in a basement somewhere. Like it's definitely. I think there's a community that
And people whose parents didn't wear latex are for sure in a basement somewhere. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. If your parents weren't familiar with the concept of wearing latex, much more likely to be living in a basement with your family subsequently.
But I was thinking, like, coming over here, I was trying to think of, like, new headwear I could wear. And just because I've been listening to a lot of what I'll call history podcasts, I was thinking, like, aluminum tinfoil hats.
Alt history,
yeah, revisionist history.
Malcolm Gladwell, you say?
Yeah. I just feel like
I do like some revisionist history. I do. I mean, I love it all. I love looking at the old perspectives with our current mindset, the current lens.
Yeah, I mean, but what I was going to say with our fashion line is I think like aluminum, like metallic, like reflective might be kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if it'll, ever really take off, especially in like the hot sun, wearing
It's tough. It's tough. Yeah. I have a sequined shirt that I tried to film a podcast in once. I almost had 3rd-degree burns on my nipples. So you got to think about the reflections. It's not so much that the sequin itself gets hot. It's the laser light that shoots off of that thing.
Then again, I think that's an opening in cinematic history. Be like, he successfully shot a completely reflective costume. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I'd definitely have to invent months and months. I'd spend months inventing equipment. I'd have to get James Cameron on the phone, try to see if I can borrow some polarized lenses, some scuba equipment he probably shot Titanic with.
Exactly.
You mentioned how it's going to be tough to get the reflective coating in. With cars, I think they have these little paint chips now that they put in everything. So maybe we can start by just getting some of that spray paint, some of that reflective spray paint, and just like do a little T-shirt.
Well, or just paint on clothing. I feel like that hasn't. You know what I mean? Like
you trying to turn this into like a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition or something from 8 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna be sitting here like shirtless with two hands over my chest. Like, talking about filming this thing purely for the thumbnail you get off of it. Just me sitting here with the hands.
Yeah, exactly.
That have been painted on.
Or like when somebody would do that trick where they like take your phone and like snap a picture of their elbow like this, Terrible, but
I feel like I've seen you do that, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm amazed it's coming up again. But I think I've seen you do it better than anyone. Is that do you have like a special one that you do?
My elbow, you mean?
Do you have like is this like a party trick you like to pull out though?
Yeah, well, I mean, like it is a little bit it's a little dated. I think what it is it's all about making
I don't think it's dated. It's classic.
It's classic, and I think that's
like sequin shirts.
Yeah. I like humor that is it's like hitting you over the head but like with like a pool noodle. You know what I mean? It's just like a pointless gesture that's like totally over the top, but it definitely like gets your attention, but you just walk away being like confused or just like, what?
100%. 100%. If I was going to write a strict comedy here, I'd have to have it felt like when you left that you'd just been in a boxing match, but with those rock'em sock'ems, those like inflatable boxing gloves. So it's kind of like you're 12 rounds with Tyson, but it's still a nitrogen oxygen punching you in the face. It's not actually someone's fist.
So that reminds me, we used to have those sock'em boppers.
Sock'em boppers,
right?
Thank you.
We had the inflatable ones, and then we had these. They were called pillow punchers. They were like gigantic, punching gloves, but the front was like this big. And we were like,
Could you insert your own like throw pillow in there, or did it come with its own?
It wasn't quite that big, but they were like, we were fascinated because I think we went through this series. Excuse me.
You're excused.
Yeah,
bless you.
Yeah.
Fashion bless you.
Yeah, but the thing is we had these. We had maybe just watched Rocky for the first time. We're like, oh man. So we went in the basement and we just started doing these boxing matches, me and my brother, and friends would come over, and like our basement was kind of the place kids were just like, oh man, like we just had everything. Like
I kind of had that going on too, the basement.
Yeah.
The latex thing's coming full circle here.
Yeah. Well, so with these punching matches, we would just go in there and knock the hell out of each other for hours, and we were just like, what can make this more interesting? And one of the other things we had in the basement was a strobe light. So we turned off all the lights and just turned on a strobe light. So the thing is you just would get blindsided.
That's incredible.
You know what I mean?
That's
so
amazing.
It's just like, and we slowed it down to where it'd just be like boop. Boop,
so it gets scary. If anyone has never had a time-dependent strobe light, if you can turn those moments down.
Oh my God, man.
The interval between flashes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how many rounds we went, but it ended sooner because it's just like it's one thing to take a punch to the face, like knowing it's coming, but like a total surprise of where you see like a freeze frame of like this, and then you just. The last thing you remember is just getting knocked. Like that's tough. I'd say UFC needs to adopt this rule.
At the very least, they need to start doing CTE experiments with a strobe light to see if the brain trauma is worse or better when you can see it coming. Somehow that can be part of the science there's
some Schrodinger's cat thing. It's just like if I didn't know I was gonna get hit, like did I get hit?
Right. Or like how drunk people don't get hurt sometimes in car accidents because they're loose. Like that whole thing.
Yeah.
Somehow the strobe light could save you, because maybe then the UFC could implement that. Dana White could get that going on.
You never know, man. I mean, I'm out here putting these ideas out for anyone. These are, you don't even have to license it. It's more of just like a credit.
This is 100% a business and entertainment incubation podcast. So just spit them out there. The world's going to take them. I'm assuming we'll get some sort of licensing money long term, but for now, just give them out. You mentioned you would like box and then invite people over. When you did this with your bro, would you guys team up on other people, or would you have like a routine where he like is supposed to take you down, and then it's like, oh, you're on the ropes, but then you grab a steel chair and hit him in the face with it, and knock his gloves off?
We really, at that point we'd kind of moved past like the wrestling part. Oh well, but we did have like some of that. It was more of so one of the other things we had in our basement. We acquired because we lived across the street from the elementary school we went to, and they threw out their giant crash mat. So it was like 3 feet tall and like 16 feet long.
Is this something you jump on after like high jump or something?
Yeah.
Wow.
We had one of these things in our basement, so we would do all sorts of stuff. Run on the wall and try to like flip into this thing, and it was pretty epic.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So that's the next level.
So for the wrestling moves, that was like. You do a suplex of just like,
of course.
you know,
You do a frog splash, swanton dive.
Yeah, it was pretty great. But you know, now that I think about it, it's like, oh, you know, have the kids run around the basement, or AKA the padded cell. You know what I mean?
No shit, right? I didn't have a brother, so I had this this genie from the movie Aladdin that was like 3/4 the size of my body at the time.
Okay.
You know, when I was like 10 years old. And it was like just big enough, the head especially, it had a gigantic head, tiny little legs. By the way, you don't need legs with wrestling unless you're doing like the 4-leaf clover with Ken Shamrock. But you could put it in like amazing headlocks, like like the giant Robin Williams genie head is just is sticking out of your
That's
your arm.
great. Yeah, I was picturing one of those like inflatable like things that are weighted at the bottom that you could punch and then they like tip over. Oh my god.
Those things. That would go great with that crash pad.
Yeah. Oh my god.
It would. You could drop kick that thing.
Dude.
It's the only way you could really drop kick something and not be afraid you're going to just shatter your hip on the way down.
Yeah. I don't know if you had this, like, I don't know if it's just all, you know, boys between age like 8 and like 12. Like, there's just like this destructive energy, you know, like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if we just like put all of our pads on and like made a tower of all the stuff we can find and just like kneel on a skateboard and have our friends like push us into this tower of stuff, you know? Like, I don't know.
I had some elements like that. I had some moments like that. I also had a basement where it was filled with stuff, like different boxes, a lot of plush things that you could knock around, knock into.
Yeah.
But I was never like destroying the mountains via skateboard. If anything, me and my friend, we would like invent games around the stuff. So you have to like run around the stuff almost like it's a base in baseball. So the stuff would become part of our shenanigans.
Oh yeah. I mean, just like, it's like it's an infinite obstacle course, really. Yeah.
Midwestern basements for sure.
Yeah. The other thing that...
Wood paneling, by the way?
No, we had more concrete. It was like a concrete wall, painted. It actually was fun. Like my dad painted it all white and then had all the cousins over when they were all young, which is a lot of cousins, and just like everyone got to paint on the walls.
Heck yeah.
So there's these early Joe Anderson masterworks on the wall.
No shit.
Along with, some of the other, I forget what it's called. Like, we called it Anderson Hall. You know what I mean? Painted that down there. I'm
super into that. I don't know if you can see from here, but my back room is painted on the wall.
Oh, really?
I had a summer solstice party. Me and my girlfriend.
Awesome.
Not this year, last year, pre-COVID. And we allowed people to plant. We had like yellow and orange paint, like for the solstice, for the sun, to like paint all that.
That's excellent. Yeah.
And I wanted to keep it going, like with having people over or whatever, but COVID really put a stop to it.
Yeah. One other thing though about destruction, there was a phase where I don't know if they have it here in the city, but they call it Amnesty Day, and believe it or not, it's not a immigration policy. It's a thing where anyone can like empty out their garage and they can throw away as much trash as they want, and they just leave it out on the front lawn. And it's like prime garbage picking thing. So during like maybe age 12, there was a public school that like was closed down due to asbestos, right? Like in our town. It's a few blocks away from my house. And so I knew these two kids where they were, I think one of them's in jail. The other one, I don't know. I've lost track of, but the thing is...
He's a mesothelioma lawyer for asbestos.
Well, so the thing is
just
like...
trying to look ahead in this story, trying to see...
Yeah, well...
the irony where this could be going.
So it was basically... Most of the building was abandoned. They still used the gym. They had cleaned that up, but like ran out of money to finish cleaning the rest of the building. But it was built at a time like where the fire escapes were not like the retractable ones. They just like trusted people not to go up on the fire escapes.
Oh, yeah.
So this fire escape went up like 4 stories, okay, and like just down to the ground. And we would go around the neighborhood during Amnesty Day, find old bikes, and we would bring them to the school, and we would spend the whole afternoon carrying them up to the top of this fire escape and dropping them from 4 stories, smashing these bikes. I don't know. I mean, these things were
the
like...
most beloved item, by the way, at that age, at that time.
Yeah.
Specifically coming out of those years when a bike is like the thing separating you between being shackled in your basement at home and pure unadulterated freedom on the front street.
Oh my God. Like, and that was, I mean, it only happened like once. It was just like, but my point is like, you know how like your parents tell you like, well, You got to hang out with the right people. I was not hanging out with the right people. Like, that was not my idea, but I had a blast.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's weird because you do want to hang out with some rule breakers. I find myself drawn to all sorts of rule breakers, and then they can get you in a lot of trouble all of a sudden. You can go to like mixing it up, maybe feeling like you're in part of some sort of creative destruction.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, maybe you leave the bar together, and then they brought a glass with them, and then they just pitch it into the street or something, or they're just like, whoa, trying to take something 10 levels past where you thought the whole thing was.
Like attention seeking. You're just like...
Screaming for attention, right? That whole thing?
Right. Well, so actually, when I was a teacher, so that was what was tough, and we might have mentioned this before, but it's like, most people would never want to relive their middle school years. Like, I did that for 9 years, and kind of seeing, like, multiple replays of like all the dynamics that were just so traumatizing at that age, but I was in charge of like keeping it in line. And you just realize you're fighting a river, man. You know what I mean? Like, this happens to everyone. But the craziest part about it though is like looking back and like all these things that the kids that you hung out with, you're like, man, this kid's crazy. Like, how does he get away with this stuff? You kind of like, from the other side as a teacher, you start to realize like, oh yeah, like they were dealing with some serious shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
that's no joke.
And at the time, you're not able to see any of the stuff that you can kind of like.
Even if you can intellectually understand that someone's being an asshole because they're being hurt at home or something, it doesn't mean you'll emotionally feel it.
Right.
It doesn't mean you will, because I know people like that now. I could see the roadmap for how they became such a difficult person to be around.
Right.
And I want to have as many allowances I have for the next person in my life.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's
like
you get to a point where like
some people take advantage. It's not only that they respect the fact that you're giving them some space. They'll take you as that person they can keep pushing back on.
Right.
And they'll start gaming you as the person who's going to engage with them about their bad behavior, or at least attention-seeking behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to is, let's say you're an enlightened person like myself,
Naturally.
It's like if I can identify somebody that has this tendency, like they haven't like gotten to a point where they're willing to like drop the act or even acknowledge that like being super passive aggressive is like even productive for anyone. It's just like, look, man, first of all, I know your game. Like, you're not fooling me. Like, I'm trying to be genuine here and be like, look, man, that wasn't necessary. Like, what are you talking about?
You ever drop a bike off a building, man?
Yeah,
you ever drop yourself a bike off a building?
Yeah, exactly.
You ever see a Schwinn hit the concrete?
Yeah. I know. And that was one of the strategies of, believe it or not, like, you pull the kid aside who's like acting out and be like, look, man, you don't know how big of an asshole I was. Look, man, like you could look up to, it's just like trying to like get street cred, be like, look, man, I'm telling you, like I was a jerk when I was your age. Like, it's not worth it. You can do better than that. But it's like, I don't know. Like, that's what was so tough about being a teacher is like, that's like kind of falls under like the cool teacher category.
Right.
And it doesn't work. Like, I think that's one of the tragedies of teaching is like you go in and you're kind of, a lot of people kind of have this idealistic way of like, I'm going to change the world and stuff like that. But something I realized towards the end is like really the best way to kind of like it's really just being there and providing and not judging whatsoever. Keeping people safe, like redirecting and almost not reacting to any of this stuff. But it's something that really gave me a meta view of like just how we kind of form into ourselves,
Oh, absolutely. You were there for a long time too, 9 years in the same school, correct?
Same school, yeah.
I think that's huge. Anytime I've spent in education around schools, especially like older in a professional sense, I've gotten the feeling that consistency is the most important thing in a school.
Yeah.
Just the consistency. In fact, you were there for 9 years, and you specifically taught like a special type class, art. So did you have kids for like over and over for year after year?
Yeah, and
they got to you did right. When they got to know you.
Yeah, so I think
because you must have had so much. You must have been giving so much to these kids just by being there on a consistent basis for a decade.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the best parts about teaching is like you kind of develop this like multi-generational kind of rapport with especially families that want to be there. Like, the kid graduates, but their younger brother comes 2 years later, be like, I'm really looking forward to, seeing it. And that's one of the most rewarding parts is kind of like those kids who appreciate and love what you do.
Oh yeah, a new node in the network, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just to make sure we're staying on the fashion topic that we have
Sure.
so adamantly subscribed to here. What did you wear to work those 9 years as a teacher?
That was a early pressure point, because the thing is like our principal was very adamant, no jeans. I was like, okay.
Fuck Madewell then, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Shit. Yeah, you didn't say no corduroys. So I was definitely still, one of the first things I bought with my first paycheck was a pair of cowboy boots. I wore those.
Get out of town, really?
Yeah.
Well, you're the art teacher.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that
was
should be a business.
investment.
That should be a business right off. If you ask me.
Exactly. So I was still wearing the khakis, but like I couldn't get over, at 22, like living the hipster lifestyle, like being seen in public in khakis is like I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
But the other part too is in the art classroom, let's say on the table some kid leaves some paint, and now you lean across the table, and now you got like a blue line across your crotch. And I ruined like 5 pairs of khakis, and I finally went to the, principal. I was like, hey, before I buy new khakis, like, is there any way I could get like some dark jeans? The gym teachers show up in sweatpants, for God's sake.
There you go. I was gonna say, you got to use some leverage, use some comps in the area.
I was able to get the first jeans waiver.
Hot damn.
I honestly, though, I can see how I contributed to the downfall of that school.
Of humanity at large, actually.
Yeah.
I would wager.
Yeah. I mean, once they allowed jeans from all teachers, I'll tell you what. No, I'm kidding.
So say, what's the difference between a teacher then, a vagrant, some sort of homicidal maniac in Levi's and 501s?
Yeah, everyone
511s?
started sitting backwards on the chair and kind of like leaning in like a youth group leader.
I'm sure smoking, cigarettes in the right sleeve, all that. It's
honestly, that's something that blows me away. Like my mom would tell me, like, in school, like, you gotta be like the note runner, and you had to go into the teachers' lounge and people were smoking. Right? Like, that had to be weird. And even in my high school, apparently, like in the 80s, there was like a designated student smoking room. Like,
no shit.
Kids could smoke. I was like, man, that's, aiding and abetting,
Smoking in the boys' room.
I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure if we talked about this, how the 70s...
Children smoking cigarettes in the 70s?
Yeah, but I think it's just generally like amnesia of like the people who lived for the 70s will not snitch about what happened in the 70s.
I see what you're saying.
Like, you could talk about like, it usually goes like this. Like, oh yeah, I remember John F. Kennedy getting assassinated. I was pretty young. And then, they'll be like, oh yeah. And then I just remember like, something from the 80s, right? So you skip over the 70s.
I got a theory for you. Maybe all the sequined clothing in the 70s, somehow with the reflections of the lights that of course were omnipresent at the discos at the time, were providing a Men in Black like amnesia effect.
I think so.
For everyone in the disco halls.
Yeah.
That those disco balls, all those colorized like floor tiles, was bouncing off the sequins, getting in people's eyes, and it was doing like micro neural abrasions to someone's brain sculpture. It was their brain sculpture was being resculpted with this Men in Black like technology.
Yes, it was a brain sculpture. I kind of equate it. I think it was just a decade of strobe light boxing, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's another way. Yeah. It really is just like that. It's just as much jostling, just as many strobe lights.
Yeah, a lot of concussions. But
or you swing someone around like while you're on roller skates, one of those platform shoes hits someone on the head, you're gonna go out. No doubt about that. You might lose half a decade on that.
But you think about like all of these kind of, public safety legislation, like they had to have a reason, like a test, some data to support like, wow, we really need to do this. I mean, the drinking age was 18 in Illinois for a long time in the 70s.
Coke age was 12.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah, and
now it's 16.
Yeah, and it just seems like the all these things that these, like I said, they're the reason they had to come up with these laws to kind of create the nanny state, like where, you got to wear your seatbelt, and you can't drink and drive. There were people that like were mad when that legislation came out, and it was really it's relatively recently, because I think it was just understood like, oh yeah, it was a different time.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving mad. That was like 1980s Reagan-esque, right? That was the Reagan mothers in the 80s. How much of the 70s do you blame on Reagan? Like, how much are you connecting the forgetfulness of the 70s or people's lack of ability to talk about it? Las Vegas-ness of the 70s? How much of that is Reagan with the law and order stuff in the 80s?
Well, I think it does kind of dovetail with, and again, get out your tinfoil hats. But like I was fascinated. I listened to this podcast called "Death Is Just Around the Corner." It's this guy. Can't remember the guy's name, but he does this kind of like deep dive. It's less about like JFK assassination from like the History Channel perspective of like, there's no way this angle could happen. So it's more about the history of the CIA and like what kind of political force it was.
Okay.
And it's just fascinating to me. Like he kind of ties it into after World War II. There were a lot of these, people in the OSS, like the spies and stuff.
Isn't the CIA from then? Like it wasn't always in existence.
Right. It started like officially in the 50s, but the people who founded it were in the OSS during World War II.
Right. It's carryover in a way. Carryover military technology.
Exactly. But what was interesting to me is that like from after World War II, there were a lot of CIA, what would be the CIA, their first instinct was after they won the war against the Nazis, they're most now concerned about communism and Russia. So instead of like the rules of the treaty were to say that the Germans had to have unconditional surrender to all sides.
Right.
But the founders of the CIA went and found some of the SS operatives and negotiated secret treaties with them where they'd surrender only to the United States. And they were kind of stay-behinds in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. So we basically hired like parts of the SS to kind of form the spy network that was fighting against communism. So it's like, I think it's not to say that that's a conspiracy. It's more of just fact, because we had a lot of like,
and as a fact too, we used it wasn't Nazi science. It was a part of how they had the nuclear program and how that obviously carried over into the Cold War.
Yeah,
you could even argue the modern day Cold War with China.
Yeah,
it's still hanging there. That big bat that the America's carrying.
Yeah, and I think like to your question about like the 70s is like the argument that this guy makes is essentially like JFK was, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he had already been embarrassed by what the CIA brought in front of him, which was supposed to be the Bay of Pigs invasion to kind of unseat Castro. That was a total disaster, and since then, Kennedy was like, I'm not trusting you guys, this is ridiculous. So he fires like the CIA director and like all these other people, and he's constantly trying to be like, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to trust these guys because they just want war, essentially.
Right.
So after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he starts negotiating a secret peace treaty with Fidel and the Russians. And at that time, like the point is that the CIA, who Kennedy is now like firing people and like deprioritizing, is worried. And so the thing is his argument is that the CIA was kind of behind this assassination because they knew that if he continued, he would disband the CIA, because the CIA doesn't really have accountability to anyone. It's just fascinating. I don't mean to go down the wormhole.
No, how many? I don't know. I can never remember this, but aren't there like 15 intelligence agencies currently?
Something like that.
How many are there? And I can't remember. I just don't know exactly who is responsible or who reports to who. I know the FBI has to report to the Justice Department. The CIA, I guess, does not.
Right.
But there's a ton. What's the NSA? Where does that fall?
So, and that's the interesting thing is that...
Because you mentioned like maybe part of this machine, part of this monster that is the U.S. government system is trying to cut off the head of the president because it doesn't like the way it's thinking.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah.
In maybe there's no accountability. But I'm curious, how many arms were there to cut off the head back then versus how many arms there are there to cut off the head now? Like modern day, could the NSA come out against Trump with some data collection shit in the same way? Well, do a digital assassination, if you will?
Right. I think it's just that, Trump is clearly aligned with supporting what, people call it the deep state. But the reason I think it's fascinating to think about is because, first of all, like, George H.W. Bush was one of the early directors of the CIA, right? And we kind of just gloss over that, and he became president. And what's even more fascinating is like the Bush patriarch, right? H.W.'s father was an oil man who made his fortune selling oil to the Nazis.
I didn't know that specifically.
So
I've heard the oil ties as it relates to Saudi Arabia for for 9/11, that whole thing.
There's all sorts of really interesting things. I'm not claiming to be an expert. I think, why am I interested in like kind of going back and learning about this? It's more because like so much of like the popular reaction to what's going on right now, like, you know, you hear these like forced hysterectomies in the ICE detention camps. You hear, you know, these kind of fascist tendencies and actions that the current administration might take. And you're like, this is unprecedented. Like, where is this coming from? Like, it sounds like something out of, you know, this Nazi playbook. But I think what's interesting to me is like, we really never disbanded any of this stuff, and it's actually has roots here. You know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely,
it's not a surprise. I think that's, I'm not saying I have the facts or I'm interested in like kind of like trying to connect all these dots. It's just more that like you start hearing this stuff over and over, and I'm just like, wait a second, there's something else here that we never,
sure,
like, we're pretending that it doesn't exist instead of, you know, acknowledging it.
Even if the roots aren't always in America specifically, I feel like a lot of times the momentum lives here. That happens a lot of times. And that's, I think, where you get a lot of strength in freedom, in allowing things to percolate, good and bad, you know, the whole free speech thing. Not to say that we're just like harboring, you know, Nazis and CIA warmongers, right? But there is this sense in America that things like do percolate and do live on. I don't know nearly enough about the CIA now or its involvement back then, the trails to come up with any sort of like grand feeling about it. I do think it's very interesting to look at CIA spending or expenses per capita and to look at relative spending on something like the NSA over time. NSA, very new as well. Talk about new bureaus, agencies.
Yeah.
And I want to know specifically if maybe something like the NSA can take half of what the CIA does, or if maybe the FBI is duplicated by some other agency. You know, if they have the EPA and this doing that. Like with, I know this came up with 9/11, but for multiple national security and just general instances, they don't even understand what they're all working on at the same time. These different like bureaus.
Right.
They're like trying to be secretive even from each other, and they can be repeating work, they can be letting work slide. There's the whole concept of diffusion of responsibility, and if you do have X number of intelligence agencies, at least 3 to 15. I really don't know how many it is, how specialized you're getting. But how much do you have diffusion of responsibility, or at least diffusion of focus for that?
Yeah, I think that is kind of interesting. I don't know too many specifics about like the NSA or like, say, Department of Homeland Security.
The NSA is the one that always has my attention now. Just with Snowden, and you know, I like read Glenn Greenwald's book on it, and that, you know, it happened in my young adult life as I was starting to post on Facebook and YouTube, even, and some of these vehicles. I was like really taken aback by the whole thing.
I agree with you, because that was so much of like what I thought were kind of like this transgressive thing, and we were brought up under the time where Patriot Act, like, oh man, they can see what book you're checking out, you know. There's all these. Yeah,
that was the worst idea back then as to what they could do.
Right.
They could see your library collection.
Yeah. And so, you know, but what I'm more fascinated in and kind of like trying to understand the differences between something like the NSA, who might have like authorized powers under this law, versus the CIA, which I didn't realize is like currently the director of the CIA is kept in the dark about the operations of the CIA so they can deny them. And because even though they have a large budget, the thing is, a majority of the funding, let's say that they want to arm a rebel group, which they have, and it's been documented, right? Like, how are they going to come up with this untraceable funds to do this, right? And not have it traced back to them. Well, what's interesting is that, you know, they traffic in drugs.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a lot of times drug money, laundered stuff, right?
Right. And so
weapons.
But as far back as...
Don't they pay people in weapons? Haven't they paid people in weapons before?
Exactly. But so my point is that the CIA literally does not report to the U.S. government what it does. It's a private entity that essentially acts. And it doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that, you know, it's out of control or it is like the deep state, but I think it's just a level of concern that you think like, you know, for example, currently, you know, opium exports in Afghanistan have gone like exponentially up after we arrived. You know, we're
protecting those poppy fields over there, aren't we? Isn't that what's going on?
Yeah, it's just a way that they can kind of create these private empires or corporate entities, that you use as front operations. Like I said, I'm learning more about that.
Do you have a general feeling about intervention on the world stage? Do you feel like we should be non-interventionalists, or?
Well, I think that's what was fascinating about this series on Kennedy is because
is it all case by case?
He put into words. I'm kind of bastardizing what he said, but before he died, there was a speech where he was talking about, what peace means. He makes the distinction. He's like, not in a way that we use American weapons of war to enforce, peace, right? Mm-hmm. It's more about this kind of, we are here and we are living amongst the world, kind of in this idea of disarmament and stuff like that. So
how does that work with the thin red line phrasing that Obama used as it relates to Syria, if you remember that? When you say,
right,
can't use chemical weapons appear to be used, maybe not sure from which side, or if it was a false flag type thing.
I think that's...
But when you have red lines like that,
well, there's a lot of criticisms of Obama in the sense that, he hasn't done anything to kind of put aside any of these double dealing incidents, where we've been supporting X, Y, and Z in those countries,
I mean, he set up everything that's happening in Yemen, really, right? The momentum for the drone bombings have continued from him.
Right, and then on top of that, he put in place kind of this... I mean, it'd be one thing if... think about it this way. If all of the military action that Obama took, if it required him to send troops, it would be a bigger thing here because we would feel it, right? But now that he can just press a button, right, and kind of conduct these operations overseas, we don't really feel the human toll as much, right? So
no, right.
I think that's what's interesting, in that ironically, or not ironically, Trump is using the same system that he kind of set up. So it kind of sidestepped. It's not like we're talking about wars in this election. I mean, it's the last thing on our mind. But it's just fascinating how we've been
culture war.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But no, I really did think that Trump was going to use a major worldwide conflict to, keep us in his camp, to be like, we're in the middle of a war. You can't get rid of me now. China's going to come and storm the seas.
Yeah. Well, we do have a different worldwide conflict against an invisible enemy.
It did end up happening on some level, but not exactly the same. Dressed up a little different, to use a fashion term. I also think it's extremely funny, by the way, we ended up talking about the military, all this. I'm wearing camo for this episode. I don't know if now I'm starting to think, did I prompt you in some way? Do I look warlike, or do I look jingoistic over here?
No. I think it's
this is Uniqlo. This is a Japanese t-shirt, by the way, is the ironic part in all this, talking about nuclear conflicts, whatever.
I don't mean to always focus on that. I think it's just more for example, we just passed 9/11, and it's something we lived through but weren't really kind of cogent in processing kind of the political stuff. But here we are all this time later. It was interesting to kind of rethink about some of the motives behind the Patriot Act, because, well, the last thing I'll say on this topic is 9/11 happens. There's a lot of people that are talking about you could go down the truther hole of that, oh man, Bush did 9/11.
Steel melting temperatures, that whole thing.
Right. But what is fascinating is that the Patriot Act was on the table in 2 days, and it's one of the biggest pieces of legislation, and it just fell into, here it is, okay? And there was a lot of suspicion about it, okay, in Congress. But what turned the tide is the anthrax letters.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, all right, now, so whatever it is, it's you were waiting, whether it was 9/11 in particular, maybe you didn't plan it, but you were waiting for something like this to get this organized strategy to put this entire book of a legislation to authorize all this spying. So I think that's what bothers me about it, right? And we're living with that today.
It's true. Look, that all happened because of the fugue of fear that was created at the time. And it comes on real quick. And even if you look at 6 months ago when Corona went down, It's a lot to keep track of the details that are changing. It's even more to be able to craft the narrative in the moment while possibly you're on live TV with the information coming in, so that you're able to get the outcome that you want. Obviously, if someone is obsessed with some sort of outcome, whether it be Dick Cheney back then or I don't know who would be the modern day example.
Bill Barr.
Trump.
Bill Barr, I think.
William Barr.
Well, see, that's the other thing too, is he was in
Trump and his family, obviously, Trump Inc. He's talking about making money with anything he does with Trump Enterprises. But how do you view this being shaped now? Because there aren't as many Republican leaders that seem to be shaping this in a way. It seems to just be Trumpism.
Well,
and it seems so chaotic that, to me, the methodical, slow-moving nature of the coup of our liberties that happened with the Patriot Act, it doesn't seem like it's happening in the same way. Although I will say I'm very skeptical of what we could pass now, of course, in Corona, being so afraid. Frankly, I think it's already happened. The trillions of dollars of aid, I think it's already flowed to major corporations, and I think a lot of that wealth transfer has already occurred. A lot of the problem has already happened.
Right. I mean, I think the interesting thing is, like, Bill Barr worked, I think he was in HW's administration. I think he was an attorney general, right? So the thing is Bill Barr is methodical.
He was either Reagan's or he was HW's attorney general. He had
remember.
The job before in the 80s.
And so what I'm trying to say, though, is that the conservative movement, that incorporates people like HW, George W. and Dick Cheney. It's a conservative, pro-business, pro-military agenda, kind of this neo-executive theory that's been around since the 70s, that these guys are avid followers, but what they realize is they can't say that in public. So that's why Trump is a dream to them. He creates chaos around social issues. Now Corona, right, is like this safety issue, and turned it into a culture war somehow that should be an objective, like, hey, how to stay safe, right? So he is the 9/11, and now they're going to approve another judge, right? They stack the courts incredibly. There's a total bad faith approach to all this stuff. They don't care because they're not accountable to people. They're accountable to their philosophy. And it's been consistent since, basically since Kennedy was shot. We had a little bit with, LBJ and Carter and some still, like, progressive legacy stuff through judges and all this other stuff. But since Reagan was their first guy.
Like Goldwater Republicans that they came in and have changed the whole scene on things. I don't know. Looking at the party long-term, ways in which the party seems to be acting, it seems a little less valuable now with Trump. I really think so. Cult of personality is so singular, is so specific on an individual, that I have a hard time ascribing attributes to the whole party. You mentioned pro-business or pro-war. That all makes a lot of sense. Pro-life, right? The Christian evangelical card that often gets played. And frankly, those demographics aren't going to be changing anytime soon. So you're always going to have some of these movements that maybe get co-opted by Trumpism or whatever. But I kind of think we're full-on in cult of personality mode moving forward. I think there's so much information. I think one of the consequences of the information age is that we need everything boiled down more and more. Right. If you're collecting information from more and more domains, you're going to need simpler and simpler headlines from those domains. Yeah. So when we're talking about civic engagement, Americans are going to be lucky to even recognize the president's name, it seems. They're at the level where they're not going to understand the second, third level effects as it relates to nominating Supreme Court judges. That's just something that seems too difficult for people to comprehend, to think about the long-term strategy of that. Like, not everyone's doing what Mitch McConnell is doing in terms of creating that momentum.
But
most people
clear.
Are focused on TRUMP. It has to do with that face, name, and idea, mostly about how the voter feels about themselves.
Right. I agree that the Democrats think about themselves and the social issues and stuff like that. They are, in a sense, triggered in a non-productive way. To the extent to which the right, and even especially the evangelical right, they have adopted the strategy, and they know that salvation will come through judge appointments. So they are paying attention. They understand, and they're in the loop on that type of stuff more so than I think the liberal media is. Because the thing is like, apparently, and I'd have to check this, but are you familiar with, like, this conversation that happened with Ruth Bader Ginsburg was going to step down under Obama with the hope to say, okay, well, Obama's going to replace her and appoint a liberal judge.
I'm not familiar.
She said, no, I want to be appointed by Hillary Clinton, right? And
is this for real, or?
This is supposedly something that I feel bad for spreading that, but I think I don't know. It's something to look into.
Come here for all your Ruth Bader Ginsburg possible myths.
I feel bad. I can't validate.
No, this
that.
is what podcasts are. Sometimes you have information like that. No, let's continue. She possibly wanted to be part of a cultural moment, it sounds like,
right.
Or it felt that. I mean, she obviously had good years left in her, and she seemed to be very spry until the end.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I'm not like a Supreme Court fanboy. I really don't know, but I think that says something about, like, here we are kind of like patting ourselves on the back for maybe, progressive demonstrations, or kind of like, kind of creating a zeitgeist around social justice. But again, kind of what we talked about last time is like some of these policy things are immaterial. What I mean by that is it's not that there's no substance, it's that it requires no investment. It's literally just people in power saying, yeah, you can do that now, or yeah, we can do this.
No, I'm always about follow the money. That's why
right.
I mentioned, the PPP
exactly.
and the trillions of dollars that have been moved around. I mean,
exactly.
Throughout all of the social justice discussion, trillions of dollars flowed through the economy. And we're allocated in a way that does not in any way redistribute wealth. I would say only reinforces the
yeah.
wealth creation machines that American
right.
companies have been able to become
right.
over the long term.
But what I will say, and I think this is why I attribute like Trump's victory, is because, first of all, is the Democrats were slow to the game. They kept doing like this thing where, since 2008, they're like, yeah, we're like the normal party. We don't do all these crazy things, and we want more normal, while presiding over a major recession where everyone was starting to think. Like, they never resolved Occupy Wall Street. That just kind of got pushed out, right? Like, by the cops, right? All of this resentment had to go somewhere. I think that part of that fueled Bernie Sanders, kind of new spotlight that was created. But the thing is once he was out, anyone with that as their main focus point, Trump was smart enough to at least throw those people a bone. And a lot of people jumped over to kind of like this, hey, I support the small guy.
Yeah.
And the Democrats haven't done that yet.
No, they haven't. That's right.
And that's what's kind of frightening.
At the end, it's thinking about Republican versus Democrat strategy. One of the things I always focus on is how a lot of times we're talking about these political attributes. They're just mindsets. I think Republicans are orderly. I think they're rules-based. And I think with gerrymandering, I think with the Electoral College, I think with now the Supreme Court nomination process, they just, more than Democrats, I think they look at the rule book and, like, that person you play board games with that is just so fucking hardcore about the rules. They
right.
will create the biggest fight at the table, ruin the whole fucking night, if it means that they can pull that extra card or if it means that they can complete something based on the letter of the law that they're reading. I think the Republicans are like that. They're very much trying to look at the rule book, trying to exploit these things that are written but maybe not specified, and trying to say, well, it says this, which means it can do that. And I don't think Democrats, in terms of mindset, are like that enough, are too focused on the strict rules, who is voting,
right.
when are they voting, like literally time, location, what ID do you need to bring there. I think the Republicans just much more often have their nose in like the political rule book, and then they are able to pull this stuff off, like Merrick Garland not getting nominated, due to McConnell, and just trying to find ways where they're pushing the gerrymandering borders, or they're just pushing things as much as they can, like that annoying person at board game night that just has zero fucking shame about pulling that rule book out.
But see, this is the thing though, is like kind of back to the classroom. Okay, one of the parts of that gambit of being that rules guy, right, is you create the perception that like you're not to be challenged, okay, for the entire game. And the first 5 instances,
That's great.
You do challenge it based on the rule book. But people are either A, respecting you now because you have a lot of integrity, right? You're like, wow, I couldn't respect that. He's standing up for what's right. And then there's the other part of it where other people are too afraid to confront anything like that. Now, what happens is when it comes time to win the game, right, that person is the most likely to pull a fast one and rewrite the rule book, say, oh, well, that instance doesn't apply in this. This is unprecedented. We have to go with this new, they fall back on morality, or they fall back on like values of America, right?
Yeah, the
and
convenience of a conscience.
And so that's the thing, though, is it's a part of their game that they play, and it's virtue signaling in a sense that like the rubes that respect that type of behavior don't realize they're being set up for the ultimate flipping of that, and it's a mask for the lack of integrity. So, and that's a learned behavior, because if you can fool your parents by doing that,
but you meant
that's the rest of your life.
Lack of integrity. That's actually what I want to focus on now, though. Like, because I think integrity, in a way, is just how we look at playing out the rules. Like, whether or not someone has integrity when they're playing board games has to do, I think, the pleasantness and the transparency of their moves. But in a way, when you play, especially like long board games or complicated games, which life really is, the transparency of your moves are very important, and specifically the lack of transparency in how Republicans act, which I think a lot of times has to do with integrity. Why do Democrats feel like they need integrity and Republicans don't? I guess that's the real question. Why do we keep having to live up to that bar, but they never do? Because to me, integrity is just a chapter in this rule book that Democrats wrote that Republicans don't give a fuck about.
Yeah, I think there's a new word that I think is actually an important one that people, it's called simping, right? The thing is that keep in mind that this person who's performing that virtue signaling of I should be respected or not challenged, right? The thing is that Democrats are typically in the simp role. They not only see that as something like, oh man, I'm not going to challenge that guy, but they start questioning themselves, and they legitimately think that they need to somehow live up to that person's level of integrity, even to be worthy of a conversation, even if they hold the winning hand. That's what I'm trying to point out, is they fall victim to that. They're not power conscious. I'm not saying that's what I'm trying to say. The guy playing that is playing it as a power hand. It's a strategy that comes out of the power playbook. And the beauty of it is when you have a vulnerable opponent who even has the winning hand objectively, if you convince them that they don't have a winning hand and they need to prove to you, that's a really dangerous situation. Yeah. I think that's why your
facts will never matter as much as someone else's feelings.
Right. And they're really good at switching it. And that's why I think you see a lot of, what was the main point of conflict with the Bernie campaign, right? It was oh, you guys are too nasty. Okay, well, this is the thing, though.
Too aggressive.
Right.
No integrity. No.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm trying to point out, is they traffic in these soft terms that come from no place of power.
Who was policing Bernie voters, though? It was people in the progressive wing that weren't voting for Bernie. So it was in-group fighting bullshit, wasn't it? That's the fucking problem. I mean, obviously Republicans can be oh, yeah, they're being jerk-offs. But I think Republicans didn't even notice that. They're oh, okay.
It wasn't their game to play.
I thought we were going to yell about socialism. I didn't know that we were mad at their, dinner table etiquette.
Right. And that's what I think is just interesting. But what we have not seen, right? Trump doesn't really talk about issues in any correlation with truth. But what does he do? He backs it up with bombast and confidence.
With feeling.
He projects power. It's not about the emotion. It's not about the factual accuracy. He has been around long enough. Enough people believe that he is a trustable person because he has power. They are bootlickers in the sense that they respect that. Okay? But the rest of the, people that see him as just, oh no, he's trampling over all I hold sacred, or oh no, it's something about me and these beliefs. They're not even playing the same game Trump is. Trump is a step ahead in that regard. He doesn't have any policy necessarily. His only purpose is to instill that confidence game. And that's really what a con man is, right?
It's confusing to me, though, because I think a lot of people do identify with him thinking that he's being beaten up on. That he, like them, is the little guy and is standing up for their best interests. So I do think there's a lot of people that just, want him at that bully pulpit with the power, with the shaking fist, so that they can move their head up and down like it's a rock and roll song, 100%. But for a lot of people, I think they themselves feel beat up on. I feel that they themselves felt like maybe they had more power. We're talking about like a lot of, white males. Like if you look at the voting data, just white people in general, people who probably view themselves to be in more historical institutional positions of power, and now possibly feel like they have less power. So I don't. And this gets reflected upon Trump. He is constantly making it seem like people are going after him. The witch hunt over and over again. Witch hunt. That's not. I don't know. That's not someone who always is trying to demonstrate his power. Sometimes he acts like everyone else is powerful. It's the powerful deep state. It's the powerful media. And he does have an amazing way.
You have just completed 1 hour of the never-ending becoming.
He does have this incredible ability to make it seem like he's simultaneously extraordinarily powerful and getting his fucking ass kicked.
Right. I think
unfairly, or getting held back.
Yeah.
That's more appropriate. Not that he's getting his ass kicked, but that while he's kicking ass, he's like kicking people's ass while his hands are being held behind his back. He's still kicking ass, but he's still being held. It's a very odd phenomenon.
Right. I think it's just usually like you just leave the rest to the Democrats, I think, because the thing is like you want to blame like the infighting about like, Bernie, but this identity politics, the problem is that every single time I'm not saying the issues aren't important or they don't need to be negotiated. The Democrats are, every time they allow the narrative to focus on that stuff and they don't focus on concrete policy, they, number one, hand a victory to the Republicans and all the people that see, the Democrats are just, mamby-pamby about all these issues. That's all they care about, and they're not responsible enough to handle the books, right? Like
the books, yeah.
Right? And that's their argument. And so what I'm trying to say, and I think one of the issues we kind of return to is that why Bernie rose to prominence is we still have this major unresolved economic inequality. Whatever your solution you propose, the thing is Bernie was the only person who talked in concrete terms. If you're that pissed off about Bernie and you're a Democrat, propose an actual policy agenda and see what people do. I mean, to some extent, I think you saw that with Elizabeth Warren, but it was less material. Policies. It was like, I have plans, right?
She had very specific plans, right? She had specific policy. Andrew Yang also would jump to like any topic. He would have a policy on anything, probably not as specific as Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
But they did try to, have those robust websites that they put up, tried to convince people.
Now Biden's like, just check my website.
Check the net. I've been told you could check the computer, try to see if there's anything. We didn't talk about Biden at all, and this is an ongoing thing, specifically in this podcast, but in general, everyone talks about Trump the whole time, and then Biden never gets any talk. That fucking terrifies me. I even see us doing it right now, where he just gets all the name attention. Trump. Once you get in that polling place, 100%, you will. It's funny I'm using a percentage, but definitely you will have taken in more Trump-related information at that point.
Yeah.
Just right now, I'm gonna ask you, with Trump, with Biden, I don't know how much you watch like TV or listen to podcasts like this, but give me a percentage what time they're talking about Trump and his personality versus what time they're talking about Biden.
10%.
90 to 10.
90 to 10.
And do you remember what that was before, when it was Hillary and Trump? Do you feel like it was... Wow, because now he's in the incumbent. He has an administration, and he's part of like the daily coronavirus briefings, corona this. So he gets a lot of play. But back in the day in 2016, he was a candidate, just like Hillary was. But still, in terms of like radio play, even this podcast, we ended up going pretty hard on Trumpism and all that, Republican type stuff. What percentage do you think Hillary got? Was it like a 90-10 back then too? Has it gotten...
Well, I would say what was fascinating about Trump is that he was able to mobilize Hillary's airtime against her, right? So the thing is everything that she had, maybe it was 50-50, but 25% of the press that she got, Trump got his hands on and turned against her.
Well, with Joe Biden, I think a fourth of the things I've heard about Joe Biden are about how he's being called Sleepy Joe or about how he's being insulted by Trump. So it's a similar thing now where the time is being taken.
But, the actual strategy of Joe Biden has been to stay out of the limelight because, a variety of reasons. I would feel bad kind of like bringing them up, but we all know what they are. And you even see it telegraphed in the sense that like Nancy Pelosi came out and said that we shouldn't have Biden debate Trump because that would be enabling a bully, right? Like, talk about a non-power conscious position, right? I mean, it's virtue signaling to somebody. Like, yes, that is technically what my the best practices of teaching, right? If I were to say, you know what, we just, when I'm with Billy, I know that getting beat up sucks, but if you don't give him any attention, he'll probably stop. If you stop getting triggered by his barbed remarks, I mean, like, you're getting your ass beat. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is like, we try to pretend like there's a kind of
you got to be able to say Biden is old and talks weird, though. I have to say that. I have to say that here, even. Like, I'm not. It's not news to people. No one listens to this, but like, long term, this would be, even if someone would listen to this, it'd be probably after the election. But you have to be able to say those things. You have to be able to talk about Trump's dick. Joe's getting old, but I'm voting for Joe. I mean, that's, you have to be able to say that.
Right.
Obviously not just trying to
but
bring up other Joes here. Just
the other funny thing that I feel bad laughing, because it's just so obvious to me at this point, is just like, on NPR, like, they'll go like, we reached out to all these people and about their enthusiasm for Joe Biden. They couldn't find a single person that was like, yeah, I'm excited to vote for Joe.
No shit.
Yeah, they interviewed like 8 people. And I'm just like, terrible, and then you see the mainstream narrative now is just like, Trump is clearly going to lose. It's like, oh, where have I seen this before?
Oh, I'm terrified, man. I think he's going to win right now.
Well,
I hate to say it. I think Trump is going to win.
I
hate to say it. Again, I want Joe Biden to win, but everyone won't stop talking about Trump.
I think, unfortunately,
all the purple state time I've seen a lot of Trump signs. I think people are very afraid to come out in support of him, and when that curtain is closed in the polling place, I think people do that stuff. I mean, just
I don't know. I think that
it's terrifying. Well, let's do this ourselves. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Fuck what the trends are, right?
Yeah.
We're sitting here. Let's talk about some Joe Biden excitement very quickly. I know we're a little past the hour here, but let's quickly do a little Joe Biden excitement. Can we do that?
We're trying to, like, imagine some, or like conjure it, like, do it.
No, give me
I
want genuine excitement for Joe. So, Joe, what is it about Joe, Mr. Biden, hopeful future president Joe Biden, that excites you?
I hope that he is able to.
Hope. No, what are you currently? Look, let's not take it deep. Okay, give me one thing you like about Joe Biden.
I feel. Are you setting me up? Like,
I'll start. You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
And just to tie in, something I said earlier, I like his consistency. Right now, with coronavirus, with political instability, with future extreme, as I see it, economic instability, I think he's going to be very important. People talk shit about him because he's ran for president a couple times before. He couldn't win before. Why should he win now? He's been around a long time. I think those old 1980s videos, all those old bits of footage showing Joe at it, talking the same way about the same things for a decent bit of time, I think that's going to be very important, specifically for how we're going to continue to heal after coronavirus, or once coronavirus has been tamped down. And long term, I think this political instability thing can turn over in a generation, in a single presidency. I think if we get Biden in there, it's not just going to be another, they get The Rock for the Republicans, and it's going to be another cult of personality thing. I think we have a chance of it being more of a stable, normal future, because he's been a stable person. He's been in politics a long time.
Stable genius, yeah. No, I'm kidding.
He's been consistent. You got to give him that.
Consistent, yeah. I mean,
he's been around.
Again, like, consistently not necessarily aligned with my goals and visions for our country. I mean, closer to them.
You got to tell me something.
Okay, hold on. I'll tell you something that I really enjoy about him is his tendency to say stories in a folksy way.
Hell yeah.
Listen, Jack. That type of thing. I get a kick out of it, but in a way that I get a kick out of watching, like, a Tim and Eric video. Like, it's I mean, I think what's tough is, like, he really does represent, like, kind of old America, like, in it, even more than when people say, like, oh, make America great again, and you envision, like, oh, they're trying to make it like about the 50s. Like, I think it's just more like Biden, maybe he'll be able to pull off, like, kind of the George W. Bush shtick of, like, oh, he's folksy, he makes gaffes, but people love him. He's relatable, and that's what I like. Because I think so much, the one phrase I heard so much from people who I think ended up voting for Trump was like, he tells it like it is, right?
That's huge. It's a big fucking deal.
I think that...
At least the perception of that. I'm not saying that that's
Right.
exactly... Yeah.
But,
But that
like,
perception is huge.
It's like Trump goes... Like, a lot of people had that thing, you know, and they probably voiced some kind of secret thoughts no one ever felt polite saying out loud.
Yeah.
And my only hope for Biden is that he's able to leverage that connection and kind of just be the truth teller. Be like, come on, you don't want to do that BS or whatever. You know better than that. Like a reassuring grandpa. Like, come on, man. I've been on this earth a long time. You don't have to worry about that. Don't sweat the small stuff, Jack. You know?
Don't sweat the small stuff, Jack. I honestly, if he's president, I'll wake up much calmer. Like we do have a reassuring grandfather in the White House. We could use that right now.
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel bad we talked too much about it, but here we are, kind of on the precipice of election.
Oh God, it's about to happen.
And
No, don't feel bad.
Yeah,
That's how
but
it is.
I stand by the stuff I was saying in the sense that, like, we're exploring these dynamics because the one thing, even though we spent all this time talking about Trump, is because he's resisted definition for all of the tools we've had to discuss, like, power tactics. But the one thing is, I think the reason is because most people on the left are still trying to approach it like, they're not at the tough love point, right? You have like this, a hopeless drunk, right? That you're like, oh, it's fine. You can stay here. Yeah, I'll drive you home. Like you're still getting, you haven't put your foot down yet. I think that's really what I'm hoping to see. And if there's a way to do that, I think we have a chance. Just because, like I said, I think that the Republicans at this point, Mitch McConnell, now they get another judge in, right? They're like, hey, even if I get voted out, like, look, my legacy is going to last as long as these people live. They know what the stakes are. They have a better appropriation of like what it's worth investing in. And the rest of the stuff that they do is just a shell game to avoid attention to that.
It's a lot of shell games. Well, to Democrats, listen here, Jack.
Yeah.
Time to put your foot down. Time to put the foot down.
That sounds like a great slogan for Joe.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We'll have to see if he busts that out before the election. We got about a month and some change before then. So
yeah,
we'll have to see how it shakes out. Joe,
James.
The first show, the original Joe.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Get back again. This is great.
And yeah, we'll do it again soon.
All right. Excellent.
Bye.
Thank you.